I haven't had many personal experiences with the paranormal, and yet there was a series of events in my life, spanning years, that I still can't fully explain. It centers on a strange black figure that I first saw as a teenager that seemed to follow me around and was seen by other people. This story still disturbs me to this day. In fact, it especially disturbs me today. The reason for that is because I decided to dig out my old diaries, and I managed to find an entry from this diary, 1993, which tells the full story of what happened to me that night. And I remember writing it down at the time because it was so freaky. I haven't read it back for decades, and so reading it back tonight genuinely creeped me out, reminding me of things I'd forgotten, but also confirming details I've always remembered. This is a different episode from any one I've done before because I'm Peter Laws, and this one happened to me. When someone asks me when I started to get interested in the strange, weird, and spooky, I often just say, since birth. Because I think it's just been baked in there. I'm drawn to spooky and strange things, which is actually a little bit weird because I find those subjects scary too. And so my interest in horror films and the paranormal isn't because I'm desensitized to that stuff and are just looking for thrills. No, in many ways I use these topics as a weird way of organizing my own fears about them. When I tell these stories, it's not as scary because I'm in control. Do you know what I mean? I write about this in my nonfiction book, The Frighteners, where I explain that being interested in the morbid and spooky is perfectly natural and is not the sign of a kind of freaky person. Sometimes it's the sign of an inquisitive, positive, and sensitive personality trying to get their head around mysteries. Well, I've always been interested in aliens, Sasquatch, possessions, and ghosts, but it's the last topic on that list that feels the closest. I say this because I grew up in the northeast of England, and funnily enough, there are not a lot of Sasquatch sightings up there. Though if you check out one of my videos called They See You, maybe you'll find one example. And also gazing into the skies in the hope of seeing an alien ship is cool and all, but it's a fairly passive experience, and you don't often see anything. However, to me, the topic of ghosts and hauntings felt different from the rest of the Fortean topics because that sort of thing could well just happen across the street from you. Of all the paranormal subjects, I felt that ghosts were the most immediate and potentially available to explore in the town I grew up in. And that's why, as I grew into my later teens, I thought it would be fun to investigate those things with my friends. We did this in two ways: Ouija board sessions and ghost hunts. Now, I've spoken about my Ouija board experiences in a different video, including me admitting that I made a Ouija board for my school woodwork project. So I won't go into all of that now, apart from just saying that I did do the board many times, and it would almost always move and spell out words, even when I did it by myself, though I understand that could still have a natural explanation. However, it would be on one of our impromptu ghost hunts that I experienced the thing I'm going to tell you about tonight. Once my friends started getting cars, we would drive to haunted locations and check them out. It was great fun. On the whole, these nights were just a good laugh. They were spooky, but this was the 1990s, before ghost hunting became big business in the early 2000s, so we weren't paying big money for tickets to stay over at haunted locations, and we certainly weren't buying lots of fancy equipment. It was just me and my friends and a car, sometimes a homemade Ouija board, maybe a torch, and of course, a horror movie mixtape on cassette so we could rock up to these locations while listening to the scores from Nightmare on Elm Street or the Amityville Horror. I remember on one very memorable night, we went ghost hunting at an absolutely stunning location called Dunstanburgh Castle. Built in 1313, the ruins of this castle now sit on a remote headland in Northumberland, overlooking the crashing waves of the North Sea. We just all turned up there one night with a fat moon hanging in a cloudless sky. We didn't have tickets or anything. We just climbed over the gate post and trespassed, walked along the coast by the sea, then we explored the castle. Probably did a Ouija board, though I can't recall anything particular happening. We did plenty of other ghost hunts, and I even saw a few in my diary today, which included some of my friends seeing weird faces in windows and stuff like that. However, my experience on ghost hunts were certainly spooky and great fun, but ultimately nothing dramatic happened. Until one night, when me and two of my friends experienced something that I I still can't explain it. And I'm not making it up. And the really weird part is that I kind of feel like on that night, the thing may well have followed me home. I grew up in a town in the northeast of England. It's called Chester Street. And there is a building there, and they call it the Hermitage. This 2-story mansion was built in 1820 and was owned by various families. But on June the 24th, 1944, it was opened as a rehabilitation centre. This was specifically for miners who had been sick or injured while working in the coal pits around Durham. Had room for about 60 patients. Now, in 2008, this building was converted to private apartments, so you can live there now. But when I was at school, kids, including me, used to go in there and try and get chased off the grounds by the caretaker. That was always a fun and cheap way to get a laugh, to get chased off private property. And I don't know if it was still a hospital then. I think it might have been. But it was fun to hop over the fence and get chased. I think the caretaker's name was Potsy, but I might be wrong. I do remember whole groups of us going in there just to get chased off him. It must have been so annoying. Anyway, my frightening experience happened at the Hermitage on the grounds, but not in an afternoon after school, but rather around midnight in 1993. I know the exact date because it was so scary I ran home and wrote it all up in my diary. That diary has been packed away in my garage for decades until, like I said earlier, I spent a while digging through the boxes and looking through some of my old diaries. Gosh, there was a lot to cringe about. But eventually I found the entry which was in my diary. And it's on Saturday the 1st of May. And I find an entry here that says my friends and I went to Newcastle to some pubs. We went to the New Bridge pub. It says we went to a place called the Egypt. And then it says we came home. But then there's a little line at the end of it and it says this: came home and then the night really began. Turn to February the 5th. I did that because what happened that night was so crazy that I needed more space in my diary to fully write it down, and I had a lot of space in February. I guess I didn't write a lot of life stuff then. So I'm going to read that entry to you now. And you can believe this or disbelieve it if you want. In some ways, no offense, in some ways I don't really care. Because I just know that I wrote down what I saw. It's as simple as that. And the entry starts with the words, "This actually happened. This was not a dream." On Saturday, May the 1st, after a night out in Newcastle, a friend and I had just walked another friend, a girl, home. I'm not going to mention the names of these people because I haven't asked permission to name them in this, and you don't need to know them. Anyway, the friend and I had just dropped this girl off, and we were sitting arguing about something, it says, and I was eating some Chinese. Anyway, we went back to my house, and after we had been in for a little while, it says, there was a knock at the door, and it was a second friend of ours. He rushed in, out of breath and visibly affected by something, to which he kept saying, "I've seen a ghost. I've seen a ghost." For some reason, me and my other friend did not take the mickey, or that means take the piss, or anything, and it was only a matter of minutes before all three of us said we were going to walk back to the exact spot where the friend had seen this frightening apparition. He had seen it in a garden in the Hermitage, a garden he had never seen before. Now, what he was doing in the Hermitage that night, I don't know. I haven't written that down. Well, we retraced his steps and we went into the Hermitage and across and around the house, this big, beautiful house. And there's about like 70 acres of land around it. It says here, we went past the notorious balcony, which is where the woman flung herself to her death. I can't remember anything about that story, but it's here. And then we walked along the graveled pathway behind the house. My friend who saw the thing said he kept hearing something in the bushes while we went, like a rustling. And I must admit, I was sure something was watching us from behind. It was a really sinister atmosphere. Anyway, my friend showed us where he'd stopped to take a piss. Sorry for the swearing. And then we walked through and beneath large hanging trees to where a long wall stretched on our right. My friend stopped in his tracks. The door he had opened earlier was now closed, Exclamation mark. However, on closer inspection, it wasn't locked, it was still open. And so we entered the garden that he had mentioned earlier. And it was a frightening place. My friend pointed up to the top of a greenhouse, which stretched along about 130 feet in length of this massive garden. And there was this sort of black sludge stuff around. I don't know what that is. And he said that it was there that he had seen a black figure crouching and watching up on the roof of that greenhouse. Now, how he must have felt when he saw this by himself is hard to imagine, but he openly admitted that he was terrified. There was a sort of metal frame on wheels in the garden. I looked into the greenhouse because most of the lower windows were knocked out. I guess it must have been, abandoned, I guess. It was very old and very decrepit. After looking into there, I walked back to the little pathway and I gazed up at the spot where my friend had said that the thing was up there. We all looked up. I looked away for a while. And by this time, my two friends, not saying anything, had edged their way out of the garden. And so I looked up when I was by myself. And I swear I saw a figure. It stopped me in my tracks. What was this I was seeing? I said something shakily like, quote, "What the hell is that?" And by my saying those words, the two friends realized that it wasn't just them alone seeing this, but that we all three had seen it. And so we ran. And I was constantly looking back for fear of seeing the figure leap down from the greenhouse and into the garden below, bounding after us. It was a figure I had seen. This is important. It really was, as in, it wasn't a chimney, because it looked all normal. I think when I'd looked up earlier, it was like a figure of somebody, something really, like bald-headed almost, crouching, little ears. And I don't mean it was like a goblin. It was like it's the size of me and you, normal person. And I don't think it was some sort of cryptid or something. I just saw a figure for sure, crouching on the top of the roof. And it says, and it was most definitely of a head looking from side to side into the garden like this. And we had to stop for breath around the outside of the Hermitage because we'd ran so fast. This is where I've written the blue fluorescent room is, with its black and white checkered floor and hospital beds. We stopped there and we caught our breath, hurriedly explaining to each other what we had seen. But just then I saw the friend who'd seen it first, saw his gaze widen, and I followed his line of sight, and I too saw something that frightened me. From behind the corner where we had just run around, that's the balcony corner, there seemed to emerge a figure, and it was swaying from left to right in a sort of motion monkeys make. Now, again, I'm not saying that I saw Bigfoot or something. That's not what it felt like. This felt, I don't know. I don't even know if it was a ghost. It just, demon. I don't know what it was, but it was scary. And I saw it like doing this around the corner. And weirdly, years later, I was training to become a minister. And I was sitting with a fellow minister late into the night at the place we were training. And we were talking about weird experiences we'd had. And he told me a weird story about his friend who got beaten up in a city. And at one point, while they were getting beaten up, his friend shouted out something like, "In the name of Jesus, stop," like something like really dramatic like that. And all of a sudden, the people who were beating them up just stopped beating them up and started picking up their wallets and everything that they'd found on the floor and handed them back and then walked off. It was crazy and weird. So he told me this story. And so I decided to tell him this story in return. And it was creepy because when I told him the bit about the thing doing this, his face just went white. And he said, "I have a different friend who said she had encountered something that maybe she could describe as demonic or something. And she said that is exactly how she described it, that it was something that was looking at her and moving from left to right." So that was spooky. Let me find my place. This was, okay, so the second creature that came around, or the figure, I call it a figure really. This was not as pronounced as the earlier figure. And this could well have been a trick of the light, but at that point we were not skeptical of anything. And then my friends said suddenly that they had seen a weird burst of rain fall straight in front of them, but not on them. And this was weird because it's not raining, but we've just seen a bunch of rain fall in front of us. And then we suddenly thought, wait, it's as if it's come from the tree and that some crouching figure up there had disturbed the branch. And when we realized that, we ran again this time, not stopping until we reached the wall of the Hermitage. And there we sat on this wall. We're trying to think through what we could do. My friend who hadn't seen it originally, he was just too frightened, it says. In fact, he was so scared that he refused to go back. And despite our, pleas to tell him to stay with us, he just quickly left for the safety of his own home. So he went home. And so I was left with my friend who had seen it the first time. Do you know, you're following me? So me and him were left, and we're trying to decide what to do together. And as we did, two cats appeared from behind a van. One of them had distinguishable markings on them. And so we decided, actually, we were going to leave. And so we walked along the street away from the Hermitage, but we stopped, trying to decide whether or not to return. We were interested in these topics, but it was scary, and so we weren't that keen to go back. Anyway, we decided on whether to return, and I saw that the cat back near the Hermitage was running near the wall as if to enter the Hermitage. And we stood for a moment, but then, from the Hermitage, we heard the most frightening moan. As soon as we heard it, we ran. And the moan was horrible. My friend described it as like a wolf's howl that was cut off. As we ran through, by the way, the thing I saw on the roof did not look like a wolf, but that's the sound he described. As we ran, though, we suddenly saw the cat before us. And this was impossible because I had just seen it in the Hermitage only seconds. Sorry about that. Give me a fright. I had just seen it in the Hermitage only seconds before, and this made us run even more. And from the same place that the moan came from, we heard a sort of crack or a snap. And we ran to a place called the White Hills, which is where there's a pub up there. And we stopped. Again, we were confused at what to do. And from there was there was a strange attraction to the place, like we wanted to go back. But then further away we got, the more we wanted to return to the garden. And he felt the same and called us stupid, but we decided to go back a few minutes later. But after talking on whether or not we should actually go in, we decided that we would. And we climbed over the wall. That was the boundary of kind of safeness, it felt. And once we were inside, around inside there, my friend saw a door that was sort of open or broken or something, and the door was just filled with pure blackness, and it just looked really frightening, as if something could be in there. And again, we hopped over the wall, we were out, because there was something about that door that just creeped us out. And after a little while, I suggested we go back and investigate the door, but he then refused. It was around here that we heard a footfall from within the Hermitage. This made us leave. So I agreed to leave, and we were walking along the street when, near the exact place that we were before, we heard the moan again. Only this time it was fainter. And this time we ran, and we did not return. Me and him spoke at the old man's hut, which was this little kind of building that was there, not far from our houses. And then we left for home. I love this line. Walking back alone was not good. When I got home, I told my mother what had happened. Even about when at one point I felt like I was going to be physically sick. Even my mum became frightened as I retold the story. The time was about 3:20 a.m. My mum was very understanding. I'll finish here. This has been my first experience of this kind. I'm not sure if it is real. or if it was all just tricks of the light and a product of wild imaginations. Even then, I was always open to both sides. But one thing was very real, and that was the fear and the weird fascination that we all felt on this strange and frightening night. Well, after reading this account, I turned to Sunday the 2nd of May, 1993, to see if I'd written anything else. And this Sunday entry said, did some revision, watched Surprise, Surprise, which was a TV show with Cilla Black, quote, it was dead funny. And then I mentioned my friend's grandmother dying that morning. And then it says that me and my friends met up with some girls, friends of ours. And it says, quote, told them about last night and our experience. We are going up tonight. It also says in that entry that the friend who left early on the scary night because he was so scared, he told me on the Sunday that he had burst into tears on his way home because the experience was so horrible, and there was no judgment. I got it. Well, we did all go back up to the Hermitage on that Sunday, and most of us didn't see anything scary, though the diary does say that some of my friends saw weird things. Annoyingly, I didn't write down what those things were, so I don't mention anything like that. But I do have a little list of weird phrases in there, which is that we saw spikes on a door, we saw blood on my jacket, and I don't know what that was about. And it mentions the word squatters. I can't remember what that means as I don't explain it, but I'm thinking I may have written like squatters as a theory. Could it be that's what we saw? I was trying to come to terms with what it could be. Anyway, the bottom line is that seeing this black figure on the roof was the core image that I remembered, and I can picture it vividly now. And you can say all you're like, you mistaked it. It was so distinct. It was like, like the edge, the edge of the body, the head particularly. It was like HD, it was like UHD 4K. I could see the edge of it and the movement of it. So it felt real. Well, I wrote it all down, and it was freaky. And I thought that this maybe would be an experience that I could, move on, or just be a good story to tell people. But then something else happened. A few years later, when I was at university, something that weirdly felt linked to my night at the Hermitage. And it was very strange, and it was quite disturbing. Growing up, I never went to church. In fact, I was very antagonistic towards Christians. As a teenager, I was in a band, writing songs about spitting on the Bible and God being a waste of space, so I was kind of like an angry young man when it came to cosmic things. Ironically, I wasn't actually against God himself. I just struggled with Christians because I felt that, Christians wanted to stop me being myself and almost wanted to gatekeep the possibility of me connecting with a divine being. And to be honest, my interest in the paranormal was in some ways an attempt to find evidence of life after death, the sort of stuff that religion offered. I wanted to find it in a more tangible way through the paranormal, because I was scared of the idea of death and disturbed by it. I still am. Well, I went to Lancaster University. I loved it. I threw myself into the full lifestyle of a student, if you want to put it that way. My interest in creepy things led me to go, for example, to sign up for the university's occult society, but I found out that it cost £10 to join, which was a lot for a student, so I joined the science fiction society instead, because that was £5. And I was into Star Trek at the time too, so I did that. I had a blast at university, I really did, but sadly during my first year, one of my friends got ill and died. And losing him made me think about life, and it made me start to reconsider my automatic rejection of Christians. I just wondered, well, maybe I should give religion at least a chance. Well, I'm not going to go into details of that, right? That's not what this video is about. But I did start talking to Christians. I was surprised to find that even though I didn't always agree with them, there was something attractive about them, something that drew me. And eventually by the end of that year, I became a Christian. It was a huge shock to both me and my friends, since they always thought of me as some sort of anti-church devil worshipper or something. To be honest, some Christians still think I'm like that because they think I'm really dodgy, but there you go. Anyway, it did positively change my life. But then, a year after being a Christian, I was still at university, I had this feeling that being a Christian was helping me get in touch with my emotions a bit more. I don't mean you have to go to church to do that. Of course you don't. But it just opened me up at least. So I knew I should probably talk to some people about some of the, challenges that you have in life, quite normal. So I spoke to a local church called St. Thomas in Lancaster. And they had a kind of like Christian counseling service where if it wasn't too serious, if it wasn't like some major mental health episode or something, or you needed professional medical help, you could just chat to someone and share your worries and concerns. So I applied to that, and they set me up with a Christian woman who I would meet with for an hour a week for a few weeks, and I would talk through things with her, and it was just really helpful. And after I told her about my involvement with, through my life, like drink, drugs, sleeping around, and seances and Ouija board, she made a suggestion. She said that perhaps at the last session that we met together, we could meet along with the minister of the church to talk and pray, kind of wrap it all up. So I was like, okay. Well, the night before this final meeting happened, I remember having an incredibly strange and super vivid dream. In the dream, there was a huge dog, like a wolf thing, but not quite a wolf. And it was outside of my bedroom window, barking up. It was as if it was trying to get my attention. And it's the type of dream that was so vivid that I can't even now remember if it was just a dream or if I physically got up and looked out of the window and saw this dog. But because I can't be sure, it's not like the thing I saw on the roof, I can't be sure, then it's probably best to assume it was a dream, since it was in the middle of the night. Well, this was the day of the prayer thing, and so I got up, had breakfast, went into town. And while I was on the bus, I remember feeling very strange indeed. It's just hard to explain. I kept getting these scary images that were just blasting in my mind. I don't know if you've ever seen the really wild film by Ken Russell, Altered States, but there's a lot of imagery in that, religious imagery, which is terrifying. And I was seeing things like that, like images of sheep or goats with like lots and lots of eyes, just blasting in my mind. And it wasn't just passing images, it was just like explosions of these pictures and sound. The only way I can describe it is whenever I open my hands, imagine a picture is in your mind. So the picture wouldn't be there, and then suddenly it would be like that. And I was like, flipping heck, this is weird. I'd never experienced something like that before or since. And then, as the bus came towards the church, I felt the weirdest sensation that there were suddenly lots of insects in my hair, crawling through it. And I was like, what the heck? And I'm sitting on the bus. Thankfully, I don't think anyone saw me. And I'm like, whoa, there's stuff on me. This spider fell on me, or lots of them. And I was physically grabbing at my hair to see what was there. But there was nothing. Maybe it was some sort of weird tingles that felt like something was there. I don't know, but it was really, really strong. Anyway, this was going on as the bus pulled in. And maybe it was just nerves manifesting as weird feelings. I don't know, but I vividly remember it. So I got off the bus thinking this is so weird, and I went up into the church. And they were waiting for me inside, the vicar and the counsellor woman. I can't remember her name, I'm afraid. We sat in the church on 3 chairs in a little circle at the front, and they were just lovely. Honestly, with what I'm about to tell you, what they asked me to do, you might think these guys are dodgy and weird, but they really were just lovely and loving. There was something about them both that felt good and safe. And so the minister, as we talked, made a suggestion. He said this. He said, Peter, I think it would help if you confessed to every single thing you can think of that you have ever done that you would class as wrong or bad, or if you want to use a religious word, sinful. I think it might help if you list every single one of those things in front of us both now and, of course, to God. Well, you can imagine that's a pretty major thing to ask someone. I'm not from the Catholic tradition, so I am not used to openly sharing my entire personal life with people. But it just felt like the right thing to do, and I wanted to feel close to God and all that stuff. So I did. I just let rip. I started listing everything I could think of, including things that were really embarrassing and personal. Now, thankfully, there was nothing particularly heinous there. I hadn't committed any crimes other than, well, a little bit of shoplifting for fun a couple of times or taking a few illegal drugs. But it was, mostly just personal stuff. So I was able to, tell them everything. And it was really intense to do this because the more I shared these things, I just started breaking down in tears, and I was like sobbing more than I ever have. And I think I kept my emotions like in. a lot till that time, but I just kept going. And they just listened and looked at me with like caring expressions, you know. I feel like it lasted hours, but maybe it just felt that way. I can't remember. I just know I had plenty to say anyway. And then I had this very nice feeling of getting to the point where I was struggling to think of anything else. It's kind of quite a pleasant experience that to go, I think I've done it. I think I've got all of it out. And it actually felt amazing to have splurged all of this out. I do not want to say like it was an exorcism or something. You know, I was crying, but my head wasn't spinning. I wasn't resisting anything. I wasn't like shouting obscenities. I wasn't vomiting. I was very happy to be there. But there was this feeling that something else didn't want me to be there. You know what I mean? Like something like all the feelings on the bus. But again, maybe that's just my imagination. I don't know. Well, after this session, it really felt like a change had happened. It was really cool. I'm not trying to push faith on you, by the way. This channel is specifically designed for people of belief or none. I respect you no matter what school of thought you come from. But after this confession thing, I felt even better. Well, it was either straight after this prayer session or it was on the Sunday at church. I can't recall as now. But I just remember the minister spoke to me again. And he said something that chilled me. He said, Peter, I'm so glad that you did that with us. And I know it wasn't easy to share all of that stuff. But he says, I think it was very important that you did it. Because, and he said, he looked at me, he says, because, well, when I first met you, when you walked into the church, he said, you were not alone. And I said, what? He said, there was a tall black figure walking alongside you. Now, I know this could have been something he imagined. I guess. I don't think he was making it up, of course. I really don't, but I guess that's a possibility. I really don't think that. I don't know what it meant, but when he said it, it made me think of the thing I'd seen on the roof a few years before. They just felt linked. Well, even though it was creepy, I still felt free and full of hope and positivity. And so everything was great, really. And I thought, I guess, that I was done with that stuff. Until 1 week later. And I saw the thing again. When I was at university, I played piano in a pizza restaurant. You know, like romantic music, but a little bit of sort of Jurassic Park. And I used to play the theme to Poltergeist and other stuff as well. Got me extra money, as well as free beer and a pizza. I was the singer in a band called Clouded Vision, which is a bit of a cringy name. I wrote songs, played guitar. And so I was into music, and I wondered if I might be able to make some extra money as a singer. And so one day I heard about a competition. This was 1 week after this prayer thing. Lancaster isn't far from a place called Blackpool. It's known as the Vegas of the North. And there was a Blackpool hotel that was running a singing competition. I can't remember the name of the hotel, but I could probably find it out because I think I have the letter somewhere still in the garage, but I don't know where. I can't remember what the prize was, but for taking part, you also got a room in the hotel. Now, I had a girlfriend at the time who is now my wife. And so she came along to support me singing at the event. And, it was pretty cheesy. I'm up on stage singing 3 songs. One was a song I wrote. Another was Fly Me to the Moon by Frank Sinatra. And the third was Tell Her About It by Billy Joel. Yeah, I didn't win. And I remember afterwards one of the judges saying to me literally, you need to wear more sequins if you want to make it in Blackpool, son. Well, my dreams of being a singer didn't materialize, and I'm not really that into sequins. That's okay. But the point was that something strange happened when we went back to the hotel room to sleep. Now remember, this was a week after I had done this weird prayer time. And all had felt great. But I was lying in bed sleeping that night when something woke me in the middle of the night. And as I looked across the room, I saw a black figure in the corner. It was just standing there. And I felt it was looking at me. Now you might think it's a hat stand or something. I quickly realized it was not a hat stand because this figure started to move. It came toward me in the bed. And it had this feeling of like it was reaching out like this, like moving like that. And it made me think of the thing on the roof of the Hermitage instantly. even though it looked a bit different. It's weird. My way of describing the thing in the hotel room was like I was seeing a tall black rabbit on its hind legs, but not a full rabbit, almost like a combination of a rabbit and a man. I did a video recently on people who've seen these sorts of things, and that video, actually, I didn't really mention it much in the video itself, but that video gave me the creeps because I hadn't heard of other people seeing these sorts of things, but I saw that sort of thing in my hotel room. The idea of a black rabbit inspired my novel series, funnily enough. The Matt Hunter character in this book, talks about the black rabbit a lot, and you'll see the black rabbit cropping up a lot in these books, especially book 2 about a poltergeist. I share a very short version of the Hermitage and hotel story in the afterword for that. Anyway, in the hotel room, I saw this figure coming towards me in the bed, but then it was gone. And I have not seen that or anything like it ever again. Was it a dream? Was it sleep paralysis? I do not think it was the latter. I can't remember not being able to move. I had no pressure on my chest. I have never had an episode of that in my life that I know of. Yet something inside me connects these 3 events strongly. The hotel room, the prayer session, and the dark figure the vicar told me about. And the Hermitage and the thing on the roof. What does it mean? I just don't know. Could it be all in my mind? Though reading my diary entry back today for the first time in decades, I'm not messing around here, it scared me a bit. I honestly think I'd forgotten how clearly the other people saw it too. That spooked me. It's interesting because on this channel, Into the Fog, I get overwhelmingly positive comments on my videos, which I'm so appreciative. And I remember reading one recently that wasn't so complimentary, and that's fine. It was about a video on the English exorcist, Donald Oman, and the commenter said, "This video is boring. It starts well, but it never really goes anywhere." And someone said this similar thing about my video on Deborah Moffat's haunting, called Meet Mr. Entity, which also is a haunting that just seems to fade away with no big climax to the case. And it's just made me reflect, maybe that's a thing about true life cases, that they aren't always as neat and well laid out as fictional stories. If I was making this up, I would have said that I leapt out of the hotel bed and cast out the demon or something. Or, I don't know, like the next morning, the hotel manager said, "Do you know we saw a strange black figure climbing down the side of your building, defeat, leaving your room?" I could have said that, one final jolt. No, it just kind of phased out, which is fine with me. And reading back my diary, I can remember that enthusiasm that I wrote about to run back to the place where it happened, wanting to experience it again. But I have to say, these days, I'm not so sure if I would want to run back there now. I'm just left with a rather strange story that I haven't ever shared in full before. This is, without a doubt, the fullest I've ever shared this. I did have another scary experience in another hotel room while I was researching my book, The Frighteners. Maybe that's a story for another day, but there's not a lot to it. I think that could have been more psychological, I don't know. But all I can say is that you guys have asked me the question. And whenever someone does ask me that question, have you ever experienced the paranormal? What rises in my mind instantly is what I've shared with you tonight. I can still see it clearly. That thing on the roof. The one my friends saw too. Something I can't define. A shadow. It's not quite human, not a beast. That lingering in that, like, frustrating in between. Now I just remember the way its head turned and the slow, deliberate movement before it noticed us, before it chased us. And with what happened later at university, I wondered how long it had kept chasing me. Do feel free to share your thoughts or perspectives below, whether it's skeptical or believing. And perhaps you'd like to share your own experiences of the paranormal in the comments too. Please be respectful of each other. This is a community of believers and skeptics. All are welcome. But for now, I feel like I've gone through it there a little bit, telling you that. For now, I'm Peter Laws. And this one happened to me. Good night.